Dear viewers, this video is part 1 in the 6-part series on the cell and its functions in Medicine for the Common Man series. The cell and its functions. The human body has many structures which are not visible to the naked eye. Many have sizes in the range of micrometers and nanometers. The smallest size discernible by the eye is 0.1 millimeter. 1 millimeter is 1000 micrometers. 1 micrometer is 1000 nanometers. 1 Armstrong unit is 0.1 nanometer. 1 nanometer is 1000 picometer. Each of the trillions of cells in a human being is a living structure that can survive for months or years provided its surrounding fluids contain appropriate nutrients. Cells are the building blocks of the body, providing structure for the body's tissues and organs, ingesting nutrients and converting them to energy and performing specialized functions. Cells also contain the body's hereditary code, which controls the substances synthesized by the cells and permits them to make copies of themselves. Dear listeners, by the way, this educational video is made possible by Prescribon, the makers of e-prescription software for digital prescriptions, available freely for doctors on the website www.prescribon.com. Doctors who are interested in this e-prescription can freely avail of its vast collection of more than 100,000 e-prescriptions. This figure 1.1 shows the organization of the cell with its cell membrane, cytoplasm, and nucleus, with its nuclear membrane and nucleolus. This is as seen by light microscope. Organization of the cell. A schematic diagram of a typical cell as seen by the light microscope is shown in figure 1.1 seen earlier. Its two major parts are the nucleus and the cytoplasm. The nucleus is separated from the cytoplasm by a nuclear membrane, and the cytoplasm is separated from the surrounding fluids by a cell membrane, also called the plasma membrane. The different substances that make up the cell are collectively called protoplasm. Protoplasm is composed mainly of 5 basic substances: water, electrolytes, proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates. Water. Most cells, except for fat cells, are composed mainly of water in a concentration of 70 to 85%. Many cellular chemicals are dissolved in the water. Others are suspended in the water as solid particulates. Chemical reactions take place among the dissolved chemicals or at the surfaces of the suspended particles or membranes. Ions. Important ions in the cell include potassium, magnesium, phosphate, sulfate, bicarbonate, and smaller quantities of sodium, chloride, and calcium. These ions are concerned with the interrelationships between the intracellular and extracellular fluids. The ions provide inorganic chemicals for cellular reactions and are necessary for the operation of some cellular control mechanisms. For example, ions acting at the cell membranes are required for the transmission of electrochemical impulses in nerve and muscle fibers. Proteins. After water, the most abundant substances in most cells are proteins, which normally constitute 10 to 20% of the cell mass. These proteins can be divided into two types: structural proteins and functional proteins. Structural proteins are present in the cell, mainly in the form of long filaments that are polymers of many individual protein molecules. A prominent use of such intracellular filaments is to form microtubules which provide the cytoskeleton of cellular organelles such as cilia, nerve axons, the mitotic spindles of cells undergoing mitosis, that is cell division, and a tangled mass of thin filamentous tubules that hold the parts of the cytoplasm and nucleoplasm together in their respective compartments. Fibrillar proteins are found outside the cell, especially in the collagen and elastin fibers of connective tissue and elsewhere, such as in blood vessel walls, tendons, and ligaments. The functional proteins are usually composed of combinations of a few molecules in tubular globular form. These proteins are mainly the enzymes of the cell, and in contrast to the fibrillar proteins, are often mobile in the cell fluid. Also, many of them are adherent to membranous structures inside the cell and catalyze specific intracellular chemical reactions. For example, the chemical reactions that split glucose into its component parts and then combine these with oxygen to form carbon dioxide and water, while simultaneously providing energy for cellular function, are all catalyzed by a series of protein enzymes. Lipids. Lipids are several types of substances that are grouped together because of their common property of being soluble in fat solvents. Especially important lipids are phospholipids and cholesterol, which together constitute only about 2% of the total cell mass. Phospholipids and cholesterol are mainly insoluble in water and therefore are used to form the cell membrane and intracellular membrane barriers that separate the different cell compartments. In addition to phospholipids and cholesterol, some cells contain large quantities of triglycerides, also called neutral fats. In fat cells, that is adipocytes, triglycerides often account for as much as 95% of the cell mass. The fat stored in these cells represents the body's main storehouse of energy-giving nutrients that can later be used to provide energy wherever it is needed in the body. Carbohydrates. Carbohydrates play a major role in cell nutrition, as parts of glycoprotein molecules have structural functions. Most human cells do not maintain large stores of carbohydrates. The amount usually averages only about 1% of their total mass, but in muscle cells increases to as much as 3% and occasionally to 6% in liver cells. However, carbohydrate in the form of dissolved glucose is always present in the surrounding extracellular fluid so that it is readily available to the cell. Also, a small amount of carbohydrate is stored in cells as glycogen, an insoluble polymer of glucose that can be depolymerized and used rapidly to supply the cell's energy needs. This figure 1.3 shows the cell structures under the greater magnification of electron microscope. The cell membrane encloses nucleus, nucleolus, chromatin, endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, ribosomes, and other cell structures. The cell structure. The cell contains highly organized physical structures called intracellular organelles, which are critical for cell function. For example, without one of the organelles, the mitochondria, more than 95% of the cell's energy release from nutrients would cease immediately. The most important organelles and other structures of the cell are shown in figure 1.3. Membranous structures of the cell. Most organelles of the cell are covered by membranes composed primarily of lipids and proteins. These membranes include the cell membrane, nuclear membrane, membrane of the endoplasmic reticulum, and membranes of the mitochondria, lysosomes, and Golgi apparatus. The lipids in membranous Membranes provide a barrier that impedes movement of water and water-soluble substances from one cell compartment to another because water is not soluble in lipids. However, protein molecules often penetrate all the way through the membranes, thus providing specialized pathways, often organized into actual pores, for passage of specific substances through membranes. Also, many other membrane proteins or enzymes which catalyze a multitude of different chemical reactions. Cell membrane. The cell membrane, also called the plasma membrane, envelops the cell. It is a thin, pliable, elastic structure, only 7.5 to 10 nanometers thick. It is composed entirely of proteins and lipids. Cell membrane, lipid barrier, impedes penetration by water-soluble substances. Its basic structure is a lipid bilayer, which is a thin, double-layered film of lipids, each layer only one molecule thick, that is continuous over the entire cell surface. This figure 1-2 shows a phospholipid bilayer where hydrophilic water-repellent lipid layer faces away from the watery environment. Hydrophilic heads orient towards water. See the magnification picture also. The phospholipid bilayer membrane. See figure 1.2 shown earlier. The unique structure and physical chemistry of each phospholipid underlie the formation of biological membranes and explain many of their most important properties. Fatty acids are non-polar molecules. Their long carbon chains lack the charged groups that would facilitate interactions with water, which is polar. Consequently, fatty acids dissolve poorly in water but readily in organic solvents. Thus, fatty acids are hydrophobic. On the other hand, the head groups of most phospholipids are charged or polar. These head groups interact well with water and consequently are very water soluble. Thus, the head groups are hydrophilic. Phospholipids combine hydrophilic heads with hydrophobic tails. When mixed with water, phospholipids organize themselves into structures that prevent their hydrophobic tails from making contact with water while simultaneously permitting their hydrophilic head groups to be fully dissolved. At high concentrations, phospholipids spontaneously form bilayers. See the figure 1.2 again. In these structures, the phospholipid molecules arrange themselves into two parallel sheets or leaflets that face each other tail to tail. The hydrophilic head groups form the surfaces of the bilayer. The hydrophobic tails form the center of the sandwich. Interspersed in this lipid film are large globular proteins. The basic lipid bilayer is composed of three main types of lipids: phospholipids, sphingolipids, and cholesterol. Phospholipids are the most abundant cell membrane lipids. The lipid layer in the middle of the membrane is impermeable to the usual water-soluble substances such as ions, glucose, and urea. Conversely, fat-soluble substances such as oxygen, carbon dioxide, and alcohol can penetrate this portion of the membrane with ease. Sphingolipids are present in small amounts in the cell membrane, especially nerve cells. Complex sphingolipids in cell membranes are thought to serve several functions, including protection from harmful environmental factors, signal transmission, and adhesion sites for extracellular proteins. Cholesterol molecules in membranes are also lipids because their steroid nuclei are highly fat soluble. These molecules, in a sense, are dissolved in the bilayer of the membrane. They mainly help determine the degree of permeability or impermeability of the bilayer to water-soluble constituents of body fluids. Cholesterol controls much of the fluidity of the membrane as well. So, dear viewers, this is the end of part 1 in the 6-part series on the cell and its functions in Medicine for Common Man series. Thank you, viewers, for watching the video.